Trystie's Quest, or Kit, King of the Pigwidgeons. By Greville MacDonald. Chapter 7. Kit's strange sleep. The squirrel in Jonas's cherry tree. Bang. Kit wakes up very hungry. It was such a wonderful summer night that we, the children's parents, stayed on the downs longer than we had intended. The moon was so silvery white and so big that the sleeping earth seemed alive with mystery and secrets, like a child on Christmas Eve holding his eyes shut and trying hard to go to sleep, yet unable to keep his thoughts off Santa Claus and tomorrow's joys. The dear mother, who was as happy as a child tonight, thought she could hear whisperings and dancing feet in the fairy rings. On a little dew pond we passed there were tiny ripples and lapping waves, though we could feel no breath of air. We saw, one after another, minute, almost transparent things scudding across the water, dancing up and down on the ripples, looking like fairy boats just because we could hardly see them. Indeed, we could not be sure that they actually existed till the mother, running great risk of offending the little gentry, caught one that got stranded at our feet, and saw it was a full-rigged ship of thistledown. It was indeed a strange and lovely night. When we got home nearly 10 o'clock we found Trystie sitting by Robin's cot. He had a toothache, but was better now, though he would not lie still unless she held her hand to his cheek and told him her best story. As we were both hungry, I went to the kitchen to see what supper there was, while the mother went to look at the sleeping boys. To her dismay, Kit was not in his bed. Trystie, when asked, said she had forgotten him, as she had to do so much for Robin. She supposed he had got his milk, which she left in the kitchen for him, and had gone up tired to his own little attic without saying good night. Then she remembered he had gone into the barn first. But that must have been 2 hours before. We both ran round the yard to the barn and found one door ajar. The moonlight was dimly pouring through the little shut skylight, though it was dark enough down in the barn itself. As I lit the lantern I carried, the mother ran past me and up the ladder. I followed. Although moonlight has so little converse with color, all the greens and reds and blues of those small diamond panes were flickering over the floor, as if the ash leaves outside were shaking in a high wind. Then we found Kit lying on his back, his right hand holding the recorder, and his arm tucked under his head. His mother called him gently. She says you should never wake a child by touching him, but he took no notice, beyond muttering in his sleep very indistinctly, "I am being very careful of the eggs, Mrs. Lark, so do let me snoggle again." I wasn't truly, really, I wasn't a tiny weeny bit shock-led. But I just did sniggle. The child was talking such utter nonsense that we both felt quite afraid. He would not wake up for our gentle calling of him. So I thought I had better lift him into my arms and down the ladder. Perhaps we could get him into bed without waking him. But first I held the lantern over him. In his left hand he held tightly a string. One end of it was fastened to his belt, and the other was attached to a burst air ball. What a strange thing. Then his mother exclaimed aloud, "Shepherd, she always calls me that he has a lot of brown downy feathers in his hair and all over him larks. They look like..." He was saying something about Mrs. Lark's eggs. "What does it mean?" She added, "His pigwidgeons are all gone too, but without their supper." Meanwhile I had lifted the boy still sleeping onto my left arm, with his head over my shoulder, and so carried him down the ladder. The mother followed with the lantern, the recorder, and the little crook. He kept on muttering, "Let me snoggle, please, Mrs. Lark. It's Guzzly under your wing. I shall tell father I wasn't shock-led, but I'm terrible afraid mother'll think I was rude sniggling so. Oh, there go the sheep bells. Tomtits and babies are pigwidgeons. Woe. Mrs. Lark, may I say beast now? No. I'll ask mother." We put him into his mother's bed without his eyes opening once. We took his clothes off, put his nightshirt on and tucked him up. Then his mother felt his head and neck and said he was not feverish. I slept on the parlor couch that night. In the morning the doctor came. He said there was nothing the matter with the child, but he was overtired and wanted a dose. We gave it him and kept him in bed all day, thinking it better to let him have his sleep out. At dinner time we woke him, but he would eat nothing, saying sleepily, with a funny smile, that he wanted to snoggle again. In his sleep he would still talk a little, but less and less as the day passed, and latterly only about Mrs. Lark. He came down for his tea, as I shall tell presently, but his mother insisted upon keeping him in her bed the next night also. I fancy she was feeling just a little bit annoyed with Mrs. Lark, whoever she might be, but she kept the feathers in a big envelope, and we thought it better not to ask him where he had caught Robin's blue airball, or how he got covered with the feathers. It was early that same afternoon, while Kit was still sleeping, that Davy ran over to see Jonas. When he saw the remains of Robin's airball, which he knew Kit had somehow got out of the tree, 2 silent tears found their way out of bounds. He was never surprised at any wonderful achievement or escapade of his big brother's. So he said nothing, but rolled the string carefully round the blue rag, all that was left of the former blue glory, and tucked it away in one of his smock pockets. He must break the dreadful news very carefully to Robin. Davy was a dreamy child, less impulsive in thought and action than Kit, but, if anything, quicker in feeling. His eyes were blue like Kit's, but his hair was darker and straight, and he had not the elder boy's quickly changing color. He always wanted to think a wrong thing out before any instinct for redress asserted itself. So he was slower in getting angry, less instant in showing his love and gratitude. He would nurse an injury too, not easily forgiving a wrong, especially when done to someone he loved. Though Bully Butcher Broom had stopped his petty tyrannies since Kit had fiercely punched his head and come home with a black eye, Davy meant never to be friends with the enemy. Davy outwardly demanded less, but, as his mother said, needed her kisses just as much as Kit. We had told Davy about the feathers in Kit's hair, thinking he might know how they came there. He took it as quite an ordinary thing and nodded his head knowingly. Yet I think he was glad to go and tell Jonas all about it. This was another glorious midsummer day, lying still in the baking sun. Everything looked happy and sleepy. None of Jonas's grandchildren were about when Davy reached the cottage. Going up the little path, his attention was immediately arrested by the gaunt old cherry tree, for, nearly at the top of it and thinking itself safely hidden, was a red squirrel with its huge tail on its back, sitting up and eating cherries as fast and extravagantly as it could, yet all the time keeping watch in opposite directions with its little black eyes. One by one, it quickly plucked the cherries, turning each rapidly round and round in its little paws to find the sweetest spot to begin on. Then it would in utmost haste nibble away a wide equator round each luscious world, throw the cherry down before it was half eaten, and pluck another one. Davy watched it spellbound and immovable. Just then Jonas came home and saw the child watching. He looked up into the cherry tree, grunted only a humph, and stepped quietly into the cottage. In a moment he came back with his gun, saying, "I'll larn you to climb my cherry tree and mommick my shareizes, you little imp." Bang! Went the gun, down tumbled the squirrel. It picked itself up quickly, darted away among the peas and cabbages, and then fell on its side. Davy was not slow in action now. He ran to the little creature, picked it up tenderly, gathered it comfortably into his smock, said no word to Jonas, but sped home as fast as his legs could carry him, and too white to cry. Fortunately, I had just come indoors for my tea. Davy held out his smock, now stained with a few streaks of red, to let me see the still soft-furred thing. Its little eyes were blinking and looked as if it were just waking up to an amusing situation, but it did not move. I took it in my hand to find where the hurt lay. As Davy said, Jonas shot him with his gun up in the cherry tree, eating. "Mother, if cherries was made only for people, what's squirrels for?" The mother said to me that she could not understand Jonas at all, but to the child, "One no, Davy boy. Cherries were made for squirrel people, weren't they, father? Before human people found out they were so good to eat. But Jonas thinks they are all his because the tree is in his garden." I soon found the little leg bones were all sound, but the shot had torn the flesh on the creature's hind quarters. There was a silence of a few minutes, as I was washing away the dark clots from the brush and the wound. The squirrel lay quite still. Presently Davy said slowly in his oracular way, "Teacher says it's wind and rain and sun just like earth what grows things. Wind and rain and sun ain't all Jonas's. So all the cherries can't be his en cos the garden is." It was often Davy's way, when he was excited, to adopt the style of speech of his humbler schoolfellows. He was now watching the squirrel, still lying on its side. I was afraid its backbone was injured and that it was paralyzed. Its eyes were now shut. I put it down on the tea table, Davy still watching with big, expectant eyes. Suddenly the child exclaimed in a whisper, "Mother, it wonk at me." Its eyes were indeed open again. Suddenly it sat up on its haunches and tried a little leap, but fell again. I thought it would die, and so told Davy we must leave it quietly alone. We got a box for it, put some fresh hay in it, a little piece of bread and some cherries of our own, and carried it into the tool shed. I explained to Davy how all the tree creatures knew best how to deal with their own sorrows, and how people, thinking woodland troubles were the same as their own, often did the wrong thing. Then Davy, on his own determination, took the cat, who was lying curled up in the sun outside the porch, and tied a bit of string with a reef knot round her neck as carefully as possible so as to hurt neither her neck nor her feelings. Then he carried her in his arms and fastened her to the fender in the parlour, and we came in for tea. Davy spoke never a word all the time, but ate and drank heartily. Before we had done, Kit burst into the room. Tea time? Why, where's the day gone? Oh mother, I've had such experiences. I've been miles and miles. I've found the land where the Pigwidgeons and fairies live, and I'm going again, and they couldn't something me, but I can't remember it all, only it wasn't a dream, and I'm so awfully hungry. He was quite himself again, and for a time we heard no more of his absurd words. Nor did he at present remember his adventures. That he had had some very extraordinary ones he was quite sure, and this for 3 reasons. First, his Pigwidgeons were all gone from the gable loft. Second, he found more feathers and some lichen moss on his clothes. Third, there was the burst airball and its string. The airball was certainly Robin's, because it could no longer be seen fixed in the ash tree like a captured maiden patiently waiting for her champion. The next morning before breakfast Davy went to look for his squirrel. It was gone, but so were the bread and the cherries, all except the stones, by which we knew that the cat was not responsible, but that the squirrel had recovered and had scampered away home to its own nest and young family in the treetops. Of this squirrel and its belongings wonderful things are yet to be told. End of this chapter.